Okay.
and you are misinterpreting what working hard is.
Okay.
I'm working like a dog for two reasons, okay? The first is I'm never, ever not working,
True.
okay? No matter what I'm doing, like a virus or like water in a leak, work invades every moment of every minute of my life.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
Day, night, weekend, I could be at my sister's party, trying to whatever, dealing with some, and because it's a small company, the buck stops with you.
Yeah.
I'm always on. And in today's connected world, you know, it's one thing to be at Deutsche Bank and then for the BlackBerry to have arrived. Okay? And so we were suddenly accessible to our bosses, to our clients, to our colleagues, 24/7, 365. Okay? And in fact, we then became expected to be connected. And this was long before smartphones, if you recall. We were the first people to understand the psychological impact of being always on.
True.
Now, if you run a small business and if you're at my stage and you don't, the buck stops with you, there's no one to delegate to, there's nowhere else for it to go. Everything happens 24/7, 365, always on. You're always connected. You can't say, sorry, we're not in business hours. You can't say, sorry, we're shut. We'll open again tomorrow morning. And so number one is that, the degree to which work has invaded my entire life is far more significant than Deutsche, where I would probably put in more hours at Deutsche, but they were much more contained. And you have an office, and you have people, and you have work hours, and then you have the other, and you can create some kind of separation between them. Now that's just gone, right? That doesn't exist. Very hard to do. And I'm having to learn incredible discipline about how I can try to re-inject that kind of separation into my life. And to be honest, the other problem is, and I was discussing this with another VC. By the way, are you recording this already?
Everything is being recorded. But this is very good. This is good. Carry on. This is good stuff.
I had with someone, and he was a VC, and he left to start his own business. And he said that he had a couple of rules about his startup. And the first is that he was not going to allow any remote working. It had to be one office, one location, and everyone had to come into that office every day. And what I've discovered is that when stress hits, when you have problems at work, what you and I had, which is to be in an open plan office with 500 people, to be able to work 35 feet and access the boss of the boss of the boss, right? If you have to literally walk up to their door and look miserable outside their glass door. Clearly you have a problem, they let you in. A problem shared is a problem solved. And that open access trading floor means we worked through problems. We had a lot of problems, a lot of issues, a lot of stress, urgent, demanding, but we were there as a team together to solve them together, to conference and work through them. In a startup, there's a sense of isolation I think you have from remote working in the early days. And particularly what I've done with my startup is that we're not all physically together in the same office in the same place. And I think that is a challenge for people like you and me, right, who are used to having that physical proximity. And also, having left Deutsche Bank, just sort of adjusting to this remote location type working, the isolation, not to mention the fact that I'm inconveniently for me, but conveniently for my wife, constantly available to her, it's a challenge, right? And actually, one thing this entrepreneur, ex-VC, and I agreed on is there's going to be an explosion, I think, of mental health issues that relate to people whose entire work life is on a computer screen that's remote. The majority of the interaction that they have with other human beings is to be driven really by non-physical, non-human interactivity. And I'm really concerned that, we're going to see a really different type of human character evolve from our children's generation, where they've been smartphone literate and they've been social media engaged literally from the moment that they could talk, and are then potentially going to be thrust into this world of remote working and distributed working and isolated working. And that is something that quite concerns me, if I'm honest.
I couldn't agree with you more, Rashid. the first year is probably the worst after you get out. The stress with the wife in terms of her space. I mean, you can have the biggest house in the world, but just your wife expects you to be out of it basically for a large part of the day. And when
Yeah.
that doesn't happen, things start to happen at home.
Yeah, no, I mean it's very, very discombobulating, I think, for her space to now become a shared space. And I made the double mistake of renovating my home during that first year. So we were in a small rental apartment. I didn't have my own home office, and that was really dumb,
I think your
right?
wife must be a saint. I can tell you, I had serious problems, man, the first year. I was in Singapore,
Yeah.
and I was operating out of my balcony, almost, which was a lovely balcony, looking out at all greenery and stuff like that. Uh, and I was really happy there. But even me operating there was stressful because sometimes I would go on, I would ask my wife, "What are you doing and what's going on?" And she's not used to being asked what she's going on. And I meant it like well, or sometimes I would like try and add some value to what she was doing, and that didn't go down well at all.
My wife took it with good humor. She knew she had no choice. But if truth be told, and I could rewind the clock, my advice to anyone leaving a large corporate business and sort of doing this is get yourself into a really nice social workspace. It's good for you. It's good
Yeah,
for you to have a routine to get out of the house. And you know, stick to that kind of work routine, right? You don't have to be rigid in the sense you don't have to be in the office at this time. You can probably go to the gym with a bit more flexibility, but have a destination to go to, and
uh,
preferably, you know, if you don't have other people you can work with or share an office with, then at least have some kind of open plan office that you can use.
no, completely agree. So Rashid, firstly, thank you for doing this call. We've been
My pleasure. It's a
trying to
pleasure.
get in front of each other for a while, and I know you're driving a successful startup, but I want to take a few steps back. And you're
Sure.
someone I've known probably for I, I don't know, 14, 15 years now, probably. No, not 14. Yeah, yeah, actually, yeah. It's
Something
like,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
going up to
suppose it's
there.
even longer than that. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Uh, and you're a successful ex-investment banker now, someone with a deep understanding of financial markets, including, foreign exchange plus pretty much every other asset class, interest rates, etc., etc. Uh, you were highly valued in the organization you worked in, part of a market-leading platform in more ways than one. You've run a large global business within a leading investment bank. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask you was, how did you develop your skills as a financial markets person? Did you always know that's what you wanted to be? Did you stumble into it? Talk us through that story.
Most definitely did not stumble into it. You know, my parents tell a funny story about me walking around their dinner parties when I was 8 or 9 years old, asking everyone what they did for a living with a little notepad and pen, and then saying, "And how much money do you earn?" I was a precocious child who, right from the beginning, was interested in jobs, what people did. I was very career oriented, and I was financially ambitious. And as it happens, I developed a very natural interest, and you can't help this. I mean, in Hong Kong, you walk down the street, and grannies are in the window of the bank looking at the stock ticker. It's in your blood as you grow up in a
True,
dynamic capitalist city like that.
true.
And you know, I remember buying my first stock with my misak money, and misak is a Muslim confirmation. So at the
Okay.
age of 13, you're confirmed, and people give you money as a gift. And instead of spending mine on some frivolous thing, I bought my first stocks, and I bought some Hong Kong bank shares.
Wow.
And it's really deep in the culture, I think, in Hong Kong, not just in the Chinese community, but clearly also in the Indian community as well. And so there was no question in my mind as I started thinking about what I wanted to study that I very deliberately chose economics with a focus on macroeconomics. And in fact, even at that time, I was very interested in foreign exchange as a student, and I did my thesis on FX rates. And after that, I did not consider for a second any career option other than applying for investment banks. So, it was very deliberate. It was maybe either brainwashed or programmed into me from an early age. The reality is, the other part of your question is, how did I develop my skills in banking? And I would say that the single biggest lesson I've learned about skill development is this, is that, when you work with any successful banker, and I was very lucky, and we were very lucky that we worked with a phenomenal group of people in one time, one place, okay? And those people were senior to me, peers, and junior. And some of them who were junior became senior, and it's a very dynamic environment. Every single person I met, I understood and realized that they had strengths and they had weaknesses. And I would try to understand, what is this person's strength? What do they do particularly well? And how can I try to emulate that a little bit? And actually, what are this person's weaknesses and how can I avoid replicating those weaknesses? And I started doing that with my senior bosses because I really looked up to them a lot. It was a bit of a shock, actually, when I realized they weren't perfect, right? They were so successful. I admired them, looked up to them, hero worshipped them almost, to a degree where you're not necessarily seeing that person in the most balanced, coherent way. But what you realize very quickly is that the strengths of what are really important, fundamentally, right? The weaknesses, you can get away with weaknesses. It's the strengths you really need to focus on. And I realized how different the strengths were of many of the senior people that we worked with. And I began to realize that they were all highly successful with no relationship between their strengths. It was highly uncorrelated. And so I began to realize you can skin this cat in a lot of different ways. It doesn't matter that your strengths are particularly this or that. You just have to have them, and they have to be strong, right? And those strengths have to be visible to other people. So I looked for those strengths. I tried to emulate them. As I got more senior and I grew, I realized that I should also do that with my peers and with the juniors, because everyone has something that they can teach anyone else. And I've always been fascinated in people and their characters and what makes them tick. And I started out being cynical, saying about certain people, oh my God, this person, behaves this way. How can they be so successful? And then I would start to realize, well, no, they're successful because they have a series of strengths that they bring to the table. And because banking is a team business, right? True. It's not necessarily about the roundedness of the individual. It's about the portfolio effect that they bring. What is their particular alpha, and what does that do for the portfolio of assets, human assets, that the bank has?
True. So, Rashid, I noticed one thing about you versus pretty much everyone else that has been on MindWealth Talks. You're extremely articulate, and it's something I've always observed about you, but it kind of
some people would say I'm an extremely good bullshitter, so I appreciate the fact you used a polite way of describing that.
Well, it's you come across as extremely articulate. Whether you're a bullshitter or not is a separate discussion, and I find you extremely articulate. So my question is, to what extent has going to a blue chip university like where did you go, Oxford or Cambridge?
Cambridge, yeah.
Cambridge, made a difference to your career? Opened doors for you, and perhaps contributed to, created, or at least augmented your things like being articulate, communication skills? And do you feel that a university like Cambridge or Oxford or similar universities still hold the same quote unquote value today in the regard of these 2-3 points as they did when you graduated?
That's a really interesting question. So I'll say this, is that at Oxford and Cambridge in particular, not because they're blue chip universities or they have brand names, but they have a particular way in which the undergraduate experience works there.
Okay.
And a huge amount of the value teaching you do is in conversation, in discussion, and in debate with your supervisors.
Yeah.
Might prepare for a whole week, read 14 books, write an essay, and then you come in and you will debate, you will argue your point, and you will debate it with your supervisor in a one-on-one supervision. That skill translated out into our social relationships. We debated with each other constantly over a pint of beer in the bar, over politics, over everything. We basically love to argue with each other in an intellectually aggressive manner. And unlike many people, we enjoyed the thrill of that joust. It was a better conversation if you went at someone hard, right? And you expressed your point of view and you took their point of view and you tried to dissect and refute it, right? So that debating skill, that conversational skill, is something that I have no doubt, particularly on the sales side of the business at Deutsche Bank and in investment banking, was a positive skill. Because in the end of the day, if you can't advocate to your clients, if you can't advocate to your colleagues, and if you can't advocate to your bosses a course of action with conviction, with passion, and in an articulate manner, then you're sort of missing one of the key ways in which you can positively influence. So I think there's no question that that was important. There's no question the brand name was important in the early years. It undoubtedly made it easier for me to get an interview and to get a job. There's no question that it opens more doors at the beginning, or it did open more doors. I could see that advantage fading fast as we got more senior. And what I began to realize is that it was good, it was helpful, it gave you a bit of a slipstream during your first 5 years, but it became less and less important. And you look at the really senior people, and yes, there were some people who were elite university people who are highly intellectual in the way that they operated. They leveraged and used that to get to the top. But that was a contributing but not really critical part of their makeup. And there are other people really who weren't very successful academically at school or university, and they end up as everyone's boss. The top people quite often were like that. Not always, but sometimes. And what you realize in the end is that at the end of the day, there's one quality that goes above and beyond anything that any university education or any kind of, what I would call elite brand name around your university would give you, which is that you just have to be a very, very good, a very, very strong operator that's very bottom line and result focused, and that executes well again and again and again, and makes great tactical decisions again and again and again. And I think that banking is a game in which some people, and luckily I was valued for this, right? Because it was a very changing, dynamic, innovative period in the industry where people were valued for their vision, their ability to try and predict a little bit what 3 chess moves from now looks like, what the future looks like. And there are other people who are valued because they're very, very good executors of that vision. And in truth, in a good organization, you need both. But in the end, if you have to choose one over the other, you'd always choose people who can execute, right? If you have to sacrifice one or the other, you can survive without vision, but you cannot survive without execution. And in the end, those are the people, I think, in the end, that were trusted to execute ruthlessly against constraints and against time and towards very, very key targets that couldn't be missed. Those are the people that quite rightly ended up in the top jobs. Okay.
Sorry, so Rashid, now you always had a very high EQ, and you're someone who has survived in a very aggressive environment for very long. I mean, I think you worked in Deutsche for 22 years, something like that? 21 years?
21.
So you know a thing or two about gut feel, watching the mood of the moment, assessing and guessing temperament of both the people and the system as a whole. How do you feel this experience helps you in the cut and parry, cut and thrust of your role as a full-fledged, no-holds-barred entrepreneur? And once you answer that, we can get further into what exactly you're doing.
Okay. So I think you're asking a really interesting question about the balance between IQ and EQ, and what is the what is the impact of both. And the reality is that I think there are people who've been very successful in banking that have been very, very EQ driven. They're exceptional at it. I'm not one of those people. The main reason I'm not exceptional at EQ is that the one quality exceptional EQ people have is that they're very, very good listeners. And I would say that my skill is more oriented to talking and push skills and advocacy, listening and pull skills, right? So it's nice of you to describe me as high EQ. I do think that, as I've said before, understanding human character and all the things that that character can do to create abilities and possibly flaws at the same time. You know, every good quality might have a shadow side to it. I think that being sensitive to that and understanding that is important. And understanding human beings is important. At the end of the day, banking, and it seems oxymoronic to say this because you see it in a lot of advertisements, but then you really understand it's true. Banking is fundamentally a relationship business. And it's a relationship business, not just because of your clients, it's a relationship business internally, right? Because it's a complex organization and there are no certain decisions in banking. Every decision is a judgment call based on imperfect information. And so relationships, trust, advocacy are important, right? Judgment is important. And actually, when you say EQ, I would say that the ultimate reflection of EQ in banking is judgment, the ability to neutrally judge a situation, both for the facts that you're being told, but also maybe the subtle clues.
Exactly.
In people are behaving and what they're saying. And I regret to say I didn't really learn this skill until relatively late in my career. In fact, I was a very aggressive, much more push-driven person. I was very successful for that, but I also left a lot of debris in my wake. And I reached a crunch moment where I was told that literally people really didn't like working with me, right? They respected my intellectual contribution, they respected my abilities, but I was a pain in the ass, basically. And I left a lot of debris in the wake of success, right? No one was arguing with the success. Just, can you sort of manage a little less damage along the way? And so I started to think a little bit more about how to be less, how shall I say, confrontational and less conflicting. But I have to say that if I'm absolutely honest, that creates a better culture and a more sustainable environment, but it is not as well suited to a really high achieving, high octane place, right? So a lot of it has to do with what really is being demanded of the organization at that moment in time.
True.
Is it all about achievement and growth and success, or is it more about sustainability of a working environment, retention of people in a culture? And I think what's interesting is that most of us have a choice, and most bosses have a choice about how they guide us, about how much they want us to swoop on one side of that spectrum or the other.
True.
And I think in the end, whether you choose to go more EQ driven or not is also part and parcel of what is demanded at that moment in time in the organization and in the culture.
True. Fair enough. So Rashid, tell me a little bit about the startup that you are passionately involved in right now. Why did you decide to start this firm? Let's just start with that.
I had been interested in startups for a long time before I left Deutsche Bank. And I think there were a few things that really drove it. The first was that I really enjoyed the creativity of building new and innovative markets and solutions at Deutsche Bank. It's what we were truly exceptional at. It's what the culture truly supported and valued. But I think we can all accept that after the financial crisis, things changed, and that became a much smaller component of our daily lives and of my job.
Yeah.
And things which were much more oriented towards maintaining or replatforming a large and complex organization that needed to recalibrate for a more utility-driven future, right? Not the sort of things that reflected that kind of creativity and excitement. And besides which, I'd had, between Deutsche and my previous employers, a 24-year run in a large corporate organization.
Okay.
And I wanted the experience of a second career that was different. Clearly, part and parcel of that was that I wanted to return to that kind of early stage creative chaos that I actually really love and enjoy as an environment. I didn't want to be in an environment which was about sort of oiling the cogs of a well-running machine to make sure that it never stopped running well. I wanted to design and build the machine, and I wanted to be able to say, from a meaningfulness and purpose point of view, my heart, my soul, my blood, my vision is in this company. It didn't exist before I was there, certainly not in the form that we see. And therefore, I think an artist can be very proud of a sculpture that they created. There's the ability to say, I am inside that thing. I am part of that. Part of my DNA and my thought process is in that company. And whether I stay with it or not in the long run isn't the point. The point is I can point to something that I really feel that I had a tangible role in creating and developing. So it's really about wanting to be part of the creative process. And of course, this was the perfect type of creative process for someone like me to be part of. Now, as it happens, I'm also deeply passionate about what my company is doing. I think we're doing incredible things around data security that are good for the growing era of digitization, that are good for people, for data privacy, for lots of things. So I find real sense of purpose and meaning in my company and what we do. But it's really, at its core, it's the desire to sort of build from a low base, to build from scratch, and to build a company and do something that hasn't been done before. It's not just that it's an early stage company or a new company. It's that the entire field and the entire raison d'etre of this company is a thesis, a new thesis. And of course, it reflects what we were talking about in banking as well, which is that it provides a very, very good ability to manage the twin desires of vision and execution, right? You have to get both right to succeed. So it's about challenging myself in terms of vision, but also challenging myself in terms of really building my execution skills and my ability to execute very, very precisely, very effectively, and very efficiently.
Rashid, a couple of sentences to explain, firstly, your company, a bit more detailed, the name, etc., and what kind of data security, what makes it a bit different, and what excites you most about your product, who are your clients, etc.
Yeah, so it's hard to say this in a way that so I'm going to have to start and think, and I may have to use a few takes, and you'll edit this together, right?
Sure.
So I think that one of the meta trends that we're seeing in the world is digitization. And what's very, very important about this digitization trend is the idea that data is becoming increasingly atomic in nature, and it's increasingly agile. Now, what do I mean by that? Atomic means that life isn't just about databases. It's about data objects. For example, the private key to a Bitcoin address or a medical record for one of your children, right? People demand and we need security right down to that granular level. And not just when that data is at rest within your environment. It must give that security as it moves around. And the obvious way that security is being driven in data is encryption. But encryption isn't enough. It's one thing to encrypt data, which does undoubtedly make it very, very safe. But you then have to decide what to do with the encryption key. Who has it? Where does it get stored? Who's allowed to use it? Who isn't allowed to use it? Do you trust the person that holds it for you? Do you trust yourself to hold it? These are difficult questions. And I think at the end of it is a real question about who can see or use what pieces of data, where, when, and under what circumstances. So the actual encryption and the encryption key storage are not really the critical problem that we're trying to solve. There are many excellent companies that do that very well. We're trying to solve a different problem which has emerged from this new digitization world, which is how do you arrive at a decision about whether that key can or should be used or not used? How do you set a policy? How do you set permissioning around what are the circumstances in which that key that may have one of your children's medical records on it can or cannot be used or federated with which insurance companies, which doctors, which data providers? How can you withdraw that permissioning whenever you want? How can you make sure that you are sovereign control of those decisions and not at the mercy of some corporation making those decisions? So what I call data policy, you might interpret as really what are the rules, the permissioning, the control, the compliance, the overall governance of sensitive and important data. So we think that's a big problem, and we think that's a growing problem. And we're trying to solve one key piece of it, which is the policy that attaches around data. And it's the data owner's policy, whether that belongs to a corporation or an individual. That policy should be written, should be owned, should be controlled, and should be enforced on behalf of the data ownership. So we're really trying to really support data security, data rights, data privacy for the data owners by building a piece of the governance compliance platform that is important around data.
But to what extent does GDPR, which is, I know it's kind of from the EU side, but to what extent does it address some of these issues that you just mentioned? Is it just a bunch of rules and doesn't kind of suggest exactly how it should be implemented? Because
GDPR is a law, right, that then requires people who have your data to comply with that law.
Correct.
And so what we are building are tools that help those data providers
implement it,
apply, demonstrate compliance, and for you as a data owner, where they have your data on your behalf, to really have much more sovereign control over what they do with your data and comply with your data. So GDPR is a major driver for what we do. And I think that, you know, part of what drives this coming wave of data governance requirements is what you must do to comply with regulation, to comply with law, and to be secure. And a lot of it is what you should do, what you ought to do to respect people's sovereign ownership of their own data, to try to contribute towards data privacy in a true generic moral sense, and to do the best you can to ensure that bad actors and hackers and that malfeasance cannot be visited upon you and therefore on those who trust you to manage their data or to hold their data according to their rules and according to their policy. So a lot of it is really around data security, because data security and data permissioning and data privacy are really just different sides of the same coin. The underlying tools that we need, the underlying technology we need, if it's good, should solve all those problems simultaneously.
That's so data security, data permissioning, data privacy, three sides, well, not three sides, three aspects of the same coin. Uh, uh, to what extent are these services, which seem make eminent sense to me and seem extremely viable and very exciting, and it's a very exciting area, no doubt. To what extent are you planning to offer these to large companies versus small companies, given that there are just so many small companies coming up every day, people who have no clue about how to kind of deal with it. And some of these small companies then get a bit bigger, they have, a bunch of clients, but at the very core, they're still like, 5, 10, 15 people companies and not like 100,000. So are you focused more on very mature companies, perhaps even like sovereigns, large, states, or do you also have a product or service in like or solution to offer for all these mom and pop companies or at least small businesses?
So the core technology we have is the same core technology that I would give to an individual to manage a personal data vault, that I would give to a giant corporation to manage data sovereignty for 5 million customers. The core technology is the same. And in the end, we would love to be providing a small piece of that technology in a very horizontal and broad manner around the world. But as a startup, we have to be very focused on how we sequence into that, right? So a lot of what we want to do is to start with a platform that is easy to integrate and is easy to use as part and parcel of a larger technology offering, right? So we don't intend to be a standalone technology offering. We see ourselves as partnering with other technology offerings to power one aspect of what they do, to give them the power, the technology enablement to deliver what we've just discussed in an effective way as an integrated part of their offering to clients. So we are very oriented on going down a channel partner route, which means not quite as extreme as licensing the technology to other people, but really to be more in the background, providing a platform that technology providers can utilize to deliver the benefits of privacy and control to their clients. And so we may end up being a company that's a very, hopefully a very successful company that helps millions of people manage their data privacy with SMEs, that helps us. It's a reciprocal thing, right? It's reciprocal between the organization and the individuals that the organization works for, right? So if you're helping organizations, you're helping individuals, are helping organizations. This isn't about either or. This is about everyone working together, because we need to share data with each other. We need to share our data with organizations. We just want to do it in a way where we are in control and we can see what's happening. They need our data to provide us with the goods and services. They want it to be in a way that's compliant. They are increasingly getting the fact that data privacy and third parties hacking and internal people within their organization misusing or committing malfeasance or fraud is something that is a huge liability for them as organizations. So, as you well know, Rohit, the emergence of both a regulatory imperative, a legal imperative, but also a social imperative to do things differently and to manage people's data differently, not to shove it in some giant database with an encryption key that some employee of AWS has. It's now called the Capital One problem. That's how 140 million client records at Capital One were breached.
Correct.
Because a single employee in another organization had administrative rights around an encryption key that had too much power. It was a very concentrated point of failure. And what we seek to do is to make sure that that can never happen again.
And Rashid, sorry, what's the name of your company?
So our company is called Lacero.
Okay.
And people often ask me where the name comes from. Lacero is Latin for to cut up. And what that reflects is the fact that our permissioning system is shared. It's a consensus system, and it's decentralized, and it distributes consensus permissioning, so that in effect, it's sharded and distributed, so that there is no single point of failure. There is no single individual. There is no single point that can be hacked where data can be stolen or fraud can occur.
So it sounds a bit like blockchain technology.
Oh, absolutely. If you think about blockchain technology and all the skepticism that has surrounded it for some time, oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Oh, but actually, is it really a 10x improvement to what we have? It has some limitations as well. What we realized is that if you were going to come up with the perfect use case for smart contracts on a blockchain, creating a permissioned data security rail is almost the perfect application of that technology. Absolutely. And I think that is our invention and that is our insight. Why is it perfect? Because you've decentralized and distributed the risk, because it's immutable, because it's transparent to all participants, and because it's what they call in the crypto world trustless.
Correct.
And trustless sounds like a bad word, but trustless is actually the best word. It's the word you want to hear. Trustless doesn't mean that there's no trust. Trustless means that you do not need
to trust
anyone, right? The system by design takes care of you, right? It's you don't need to trust, right? It's all taking care of you. The smart contracts and the policy work on your behalf automatically, immutably, unhackably, and unalterably. And that is why I think it represents a 10x improvement in data security infrastructure.
Rashid, given what you described, you might have probably needed some really super smart people to work in your organization. How did you put your team together, and can you talk us through that a little bit?
Well, I was very, very lucky in the sense that some super, super smart people approached me and said, we have an invention. This is what it does. What do you think? And I immediately realized the power and the value of that invention. And I could immediately see how it had an ability to be transformative. And so I said to them, you know, I want to be part of this journey and I want to participate. I can't take any credit for having thought of it, right? But it's clear you've got something here that addresses a real gap in the market. And it's a big gap, and it's an extremely valuable gap to close, right? And therefore, from my point of view, having been 25 years in banking, you know, as one of our colleagues once said, when all you have is a hammer, all you see are nails. I saw this invention, what I saw was tremendous commercial value, right? I thought the invention itself was beautiful inherently, and I thought it was very, very intellectually pure and interesting, and I immediately got how powerful it was. But clearly I could see that commercially it had tremendous, tremendous value and application. And so it was an opportunity that I simply could not pass up on.
And how do the dynamics of a situation like this work, where a couple of co-founders approach you, and then you kind of bring in other ideas, take them to market, shepherd them, perhaps end up as CFO or CEO of the company. Is it like is there like if you can talk about it, is there any initial kind of tension that kind of goes through this process, or something that comes up later? Are there ego issues? How does that work?
Question. Very, very good question. And we have an unusual sort of answer to it, if you like. We are equal partners, all three of us, right? I'm the CEO, but I'm no less an equal partner to the CTO or our third partner. We are equally on the hook to bring value to the company. Yes, I am the leadership and I have to make the decisions, and in the end, I have the casting vote. But I do not see this as my company in which they have a ton of equity. I see it as a genuine partnership, and we are very, very different. So as you can imagine, that complete orthogonal skill set can lead to chaos because no one can understand each other and we all think differently, or it can lead to an efficient frontier in which the sum of the parts is much greater. And my experience has been that we have developed cultural techniques and a way of working together where we do argue and debate. We do come at each other in the way that I was describing, where it's all about, the intellectual joust. But then we agree, we have consensus, and we move forward. And I think that the decisions we make are better because of that orthogonal debate that we have around everything we're doing. And we are a really good internal sounding board for each other, right? So a lot of our relationship as co-founders is that if I want to do something as a CEO, I will simply talk for half an hour about my thoughts and my vision, and they will reflect upon it and they will feed back to me. So it's not even necessarily that we're joint decision making all the time. Sometimes it's just that I need people to honestly reflect back to me on what I'm thinking and say what they agree with and identify what they don't agree with, and to move forward that way. And we've developed a good dynamic around that. So far, so good, touch wood, and onwards and upwards.
Perfect answer, Rashid. Just to change the direction a little bit, but sticking on within startups and Lacero, how does how do I put this? How do you go about taking a company like Lacero eventually to market? How do you value a company like this? This is like kind of corporate finance 101 question, if you like, but a lot of people don't fully get this, right? So I'd like to hear from in your words, when you go to an investor, if you were to go to an investor and say, I'd like you to invest $100,000. I mean, and you may not want to do that. I know you're independently wealthy, Rashid, so you may not want to do that. But if you,
I funded this entire company through investors for the simple reason that it is the discipline of being forced for your story to be coherent enough, to be good enough, to persuade people, and to bring partners, stakeholders, and shareholders on board, okay? And I very deliberately not self-funded this company because I think that I've seen many examples where people have done that and they have not exerted the kind of ruthless discipline that we have exerted. That what we have achieved and the amount of technology we've built on the money that we've done it is far more than any of the people we speak to and competitors we see in the market. Why? Because there was no easy money tree. Every penny had to be fought for, and every penny that we spent, we thought very carefully about what we were doing and why we were doing it. I think the efficiency with which we've done CapEx has been off the charts better because of the discipline of being accountable to shareholders, of the scrutiny, of the fact that we funded ourselves lean to force ourselves to be efficient and effective. And I will say we're very unusual in one respect. the market conventionally works like this. What is the problem that you are trying to solve? Show me that it's a real problem for real people that have money to pay to solve it, and show me that there's a large addressable market for that problem. Show me there's enough money, enough people with enough money that you can build a successful company of that addressable market. And then tell me how you're going to try and build technology to solve that problem. That is how it works, okay? And quite often what they want you to do is to build market traction, go out, talk to people, understand what they really need, and respond to that by building a tech stack that can do that. We did not do that, right? That's just not, with the best will in the world, that wasn't our path. We had an invention. It did something that we thought was powerful, right? And we took the point of view that if the technology is 10x technology, if it's powerful enough and it's good enough, right? It's not simply about addressing problems that people have. Undoubtedly, they do have them. We always used to say a really innovative solution is, a really innovative solution in banking is about one that it solves a problem your client wasn't even necessarily that conscious existed in the first place. Right? But when you talk to them about the product and what it does, they can immediately understand how that is transformative for what they're doing. So we're a little bit in that second category.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you essentially made people aware of a need which perhaps some of the potential clients, were not really aware of. But once you pointed it out, and once you told them how your solution solved all these second layer concerns and addressed these three aspects of of data management and data privacy and so on, they essentially became pretty seized of the idea. And how was that kind of shift or transformation when you make someone aware of a need that they aren't aware of? Is there resistance to accepting that there is a need, and how do you kind of get people through that process?
So I think it's not a binary process where you show up and say, you really need this, and I'm going to persuade you that you need it. I think it's an iterative process where you say, we'd like to show you how we can do certain things, how we can manage data governance and compliance. And we thought that maybe for you, this would be a good product because you could apply it in this way and solve some problems. And so they said, well, actually, yes, fundamentally, that is a problem that we recognize. We're not quite sure how we want to go about solving it or what the pathway to a solution looks like. And this is a lead client that really helped us develop the product. But, we want to work with you because we need the solution and we want to make sure that it works with us. And so we had a very interactive process around how, not what the fundamental problem was, but in a more practical sense about what a workflow usable solution would look like. Because honestly, the worst thing you can do is say, here, I've got this magic box, it can solve a problem, but it's going to completely interfere or replace or rip out or require you to completely reinvent yourself as an organization to be able to use it. And that clearly doesn't work and isn't going to work. You have to have something which is modular, which is a layer. It has to be additive, it has to be incremental, and it has to plug in and be onboarded with the absolute minimum of effort, because there's no point solving a problem if the effort in solving that problem is more than the problem itself. Inertia is the biggest barrier to innovation, right? And so you have to make it easy for them to make that change. The reality is that we don't have a lot of problem persuading people that this is a core issue that we face as a society, not just as a corporation or a data manager. It's become very much part of the consciousness. And what we have found incredible is the breadth of people around the world with unbelievably different businesses that have said to us when we presented them with an example of a use case for digital asset security, where they were immediately able to join the dots and say, that's really great. You've done this for digital asset security. I can really see how that can help me with my industrial secrets. It's really great that you've done that with digital asset identity. I can really see how that's going to help me as a medical records enforcement agency. I can really see how that's going to help me manage GDPR or code permissioning in a database. So I think the general concept is really quite well understood, and actually better understood, if I'm perfectly honest, than we thought it would be, right? The hard work is not in persuading people that it's a problem and that we need solutions. The hard work is in actually executing and providing real, tangible commitment to working together on a proof of concept to implement it as the actual solution to the problem that they're trying to solve.
Interesting. So you never found anyone, or you typically didn't find people resistant to adopting the idea. On the contrary, you found people immediately as soon as you presented to them, the switch turned on pretty quickly, instantly, and they said, "Yeah, this is it. This is great. And how can I use this for my situation?"
Yeah,
That's pretty amazing. So how do you how do you
I'm amazed. I've been positively surprised the degree to which people are able to join the dots at a conceptual level and apply it. And what it tells me is that this category of problems, let's not call it a problem, let's call it a category of problems around data, security, privacy, velocity, agility, sharing, policy sums it all up. This category of issues is very much, we've hit a moment in time. It's very much of this moment, and we have, in the last year that we have really been working on developing the actual technology solution, we started to see a lot more people talk in conceptual terms around the type of solution that they need that reflects or relates a little bit to what we've done. Maybe not highly specifically, because we thought about solving it in a very particular architecture and in a very particular way. But we've seen, a lot more general recognition of the fact that there is, important work to be done in this area now. And so I think we've hit a moment in time where, the kind of things we're advocating and that we're saying that people should be focusing on and that we can help them try and solve are, high on the agenda and high on the priority list. And as the number one thing you need to do is make sure that you're working with people for whom the thing you're doing for them is one of their top priorities. Because if it isn't, they won't put the work and the effort in to really get you into production with them. They won't show that kind of drive and commitment. And as a startup with limited resources and limited people, we cannot afford to bet those resources and people on working with clients that aren't deeply committed. And so we really need to be identifying not just those who have that problem, but who are very committed to solving it and are committed to a sense of urgency in solving it. And that's probably the best sort of client that you can find.
Sorry. And Rashid, how does a startup in a similar-ish situation to yours value a company like this when it goes to investors? You mentioned you've raised funds. What was your thought process as you valued this company? And if it's not extremely confidential, if you could share how that evolved and what kind of valuation you arrived at, and what were the drivers to that. Just curious, because there are a lot of people across the world who are trying to do stuff that you are, maybe not as cool, maybe it's very interesting in some cases, but everyone is very passionate about their startup, and people often wonder, how should we value it? Like I've seen many companies that kind of just put a finger up in the air and say, okay, $2 million. It seems to be like the magic number very often. and or £2 million or whatever, right? Your euros, 2 million euros. So what was your thinking as you went through it? Was it kind of just a gut feel? Was there some
I
initially it
think
has to be a bit of what the
I'm telling
market
you,
is accepting, right?
I
So
think we're a very bad example. And the first reason is we think we had significant IP at the point at which we did a friends and family round. Okay. So we thought that our intrinsic value in terms of the technology, knowledge, and ownership that my partners had, that they brought to the table on day one, was very material. It had a lot of significant intrinsic value.
yeah,
And we raised at only what we think is a 30 or 40% premium to that intrinsic value.
okay,
Whereas a lot of startups that raise at a slightly lower valuation, 100% of that is goodwill. None of it is intrinsic. It's just the value of the idea,
okay,
right? We've also found that the path is very, very standardized. You know, there's a bid offer and a range that applies to companies in different stages, depending on whether you've got any demonstrable technology, whether you've got any paying clients, whether you've got a bunch of paying clients, whether your ARR is $250, $500, $1 million. Are you a SaaS company? Are you a consumer company? What does your customer acquisition cost look like? So there are fairly good things, and many VCs have been kind enough to publish heuristics that sort of determine a little bit of that and how things work. For example, there's a very good one called The Napkin around enterprise SaaS valuations.
okay.
It's called The Napkin because a VC was trying to explain to a company they were investing in how much they would value it at, and they would manage to write down basically a really reasonable formula on a napkin that sort of gives you the idea of what that range should be and what are the drivers of it. What I've discovered, though, is that the market in general, from a valuation point of view, generally values customer traction and proof of product market fit most highly of all. And many companies will be tempted to think that the quality of their technology and product is the most valuable thing of all. But in reality, you know, many investors, you will do better generating, you know, some customer traction with a slightly rickety product that's about to fall apart than building a super product and then saying, well, I spent all my money developing that product, and now I'm going to go and try and find some customers. That's a path we followed. We are a deep tech company, and we figured that a lot of the value is in our IP,
Okay.
and we think our IP is very unique. But in general, you know, people who are able to value companies on that basis are few and far between, and there's a speed limit to what you can get. No matter how good that technology is or how much it might be worth on an intrinsic basis, because without the data points and the touch points and the evidence that anyone will actually pay for it, it can be the most valuable technology in the world. And I understand that argument, and I understand, you know, that logic as well, which is that, you know, there's no such thing as the value of your technology. There's only one thing, which is how many people are prepared to pay for it, how much are they prepared to pay for it, how much does it cost you to acquire them to pay that amount for it. So I think valuation is a difficult issue. Yeah, there's some standardized sort of pathways that startups tend to work at. You know, it also really depends a lot on the people and on the team, okay, right? And the valuation of a company is very dependent on having credible individuals that can drive that process and that have experience in managing businesses. But you know, it's 1,000 ways to slice the cake, 1,000 ways to skin the cat, and I don't think there's any, you know, good answers. At the end of the day, it's very simple. You know, there's a market, and you know, people will need to try to get the valuations, the best valuations that the market will bear. And it's a dynamic process, right? And of course, the market itself goes through periods of being extremely speculative and in bubbles around valuations for certain types of businesses. So, you know, if I'd been a year earlier and had valued myself in the crypto hype cycle, I would have been able to add a zero to my valuation. It would have been the wrong valuation, but I would have been able to do it. And now I think there are many people nursing significant pain around having paid those valuations. So the market kind of learns as well over time. And they look for more substance in what you're doing. And so we are in a phase now where I think the market is, not only become, much more healthily skeptical, but possibly due to the scars that they carry, they really want to see a lot more proof points, and they really want to see a lot more, intrinsic and traditional, shall we say, touch points on valuation that they used to. And so people are talking about what they generally call the Wework Backlash, which is to say that this ability to, sort of blitz scale and sort of just create self-fulfilling valuations has been called into question. And there is a slightly, tighter focus and a more realistic focus on, well, exactly when will you get to break even, and exactly when will you be profitable, and what does that pathway look like? So there's a little bit more focus on that as well.
So as an investor, you focused on client penetration and various statistics like that when you kind of were an investor. And as someone now leading this firm, you are, as you yourself said, slightly counterintuitively focusing more on what you call the intrinsic value. Can you explain for viewers who are not cognizant of options markets or terminology like intrinsic value? What do you mean by intrinsic value?
So I think there's two things, which is, what is the technology actually capable of doing, right? And secondly, which is, what is the commercial value of what that technology is capable of doing? Okay. And you can have a technology with a lot of intrinsic value and it can do really incredible things with data. But if there's no one out there in the world who wants to use that, or there's no commercial application for those incredible things it can do with data, then it has a lot of inherent geek value. It's very interesting for a computer scientist. It's very interesting to read the papers, and it's possibly beautiful to look at as a piece of really brilliant invention, but it has no commercial value, right? And so it is an intellectual exercise, and it is beautiful in the way that an excellent theory is beautiful, right? Okay. But what really matters is what is the commercial application of that intrinsic value. And I don't think, and please don't misunderstand me, I don't think that any company should focus on that intrinsic value versus its commercial application. Okay. It's a question of how you sequence your prioritization of how you build and in what order. Where do you spend your scarce resources? Do you spend them on development, or you spend them on marketing? Yeah. If you spend them all on marketing, great, you have a piece of junk to show people and it won't last very long. If you spend them all in development, you have the greatest product in the world that would never see light of day and no one would ever use. So it's about finding the balance and about iterating that. And I think what you do is you go from periods where you're more development heavy to periods where you're more marketing heavy. But apropos to the profitability question, when you get to the marketing point, you've also got to be very careful that you're not fooling yourself by achieving marketing success simply by throwing a ton of money at the problem. If it costs you an extraordinary amount of money to acquire clients, then there's possibly something wrong with the natural attractiveness of your product. You also want to pay attention to the fact that you can acquire clients in a relatively cost-effective manner, because there's just a very natural pull that you get from them when they see your product and they see what it can do for them, right? If you're literally having to shove things down people's throats, in a hard sell, probably a good sign that you don't have a 10x product, right? Whereas if you really do have a 10x product, a real 10x product, a lot of the marketing momentum and growth will be through word of mouth, through seeing what other people do, So yes, you have to make a big push to get going, but once you've pushed the bobsleigh off the start, you'll be zooming down the run pretty quickly without too much effort.
Excellent. Rashid, and on the note of pushing the bobsleigh down the slope and with all the momentum, I want to thank you again for doing this and for giving our viewers an insight into who you are, your bit of a story of your journey, and a lot about Lacero and your thought process on startups. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.